There's a lot of controversy surrounding Final Fantasy VIII, from the heavy sci-fi setting to the extremely exploitable junction system, along with some things that just don't seem to add up as we progress through the story. So, I'm going to share some of my opinions on Final Fantasy VIII and hopefully show you why it's still a great game and why you need to play it now. I see that this game gets a lot of dislike from Final Fantasy fans, and trying to see it from a more objective perspective, I can see why. I'm not here to just say, this game is great, play it. I want you to think about the game and say, I want to experience this. The concept as a whole pushes the boundaries of what Final Fantasy should be. Even though the Final Fantasy series had dabbled in time travel in earlier games, this was the series' first real foray into time and space, and despite a few hiccups, they knocked it out of the park. Now, the story of this game starts out as you would expect from any Final Fantasy game. A bunch of teenagers get thrown into some sort of wild and ridiculous plot, and this time the teenagers are trainees on the verge of graduating as highly skilled mercenaries called Seeds, when they are sent off to secure the central square of the invaded town of Dalat as part of their final exam. Our main character Squall and his classmates Zell and Selphie uncover the initial reason for the invasion, make a narrow escape, and successfully graduate as Seeds. As newly appointed Seed members, they are dispatched to help a rebel faction called the Forest Owls reclaim the independence of the occupied nation of Timber. And that means kidnapping a political figure from a train and interrogating him. The plan was executed successfully, however, the political figure was a double. Now finding themselves in the middle of political upheaval, things go from bad to worse as Squall and company get caught up in assassinations, prison breaks, and foiling missile launches, and that's before the game goes absolutely nuts. From time-manipulating witches to giant floating high-tech refrigerators that attract monsters from the moon to traveling into deep space and commandeering a spaceship from oddly coloured aliens, this game goes all in with the crazy stuff. And you know what? I love this game for its craziness. It's what makes the whole experience unique. So the fights in Final Fantasy VIII have a few new features, and some of those can also be considered flaws too. The implementation of the trigger for Squall's basic attacks and limit breaks is very cool and give the player something to do when not navigating menus. It essentially grants a critical hit with every strike and makes battles a little bit more engaging. Some of the other limit breaks have similar features, like Zell, who has to input commands much like Sabin in Final Fantasy VI. Again, a great way to make players feel like they're more involved in the fight. Unfortunately, limit breaks always happen when you're at critical HP, and at times can be quite easy to exploit, even with the risk of being KO'd. And sadly, the risk more often than not ends in reward until you're at the final stages of the game. GFs, or Guardian Forces, are the summoning monsters in this game. They're pretty cool stylistically and play kind of a big part in the story of Final Fantasy VIII, but they're not only just for summoning. You need them to equip abilities on your team members. They can also learn their own abilities and commands that improve them in battle, and they can also help you gain access to items and magic at any time. Now, it's time to talk about the junction system, and at times it's hard to defend this system despite being so incredibly intricate and versatile. The junction system is the main equip and ability system in Final Fantasy VIII. You can draw out magic from designated points or monsters and equip them to your weapons to improve your strengths and weaknesses. And when it's put like that, it sounds great, but the reality is that you can gain access to strong magic early in the game thanks to GF abilities, and it can ruin the natural difficulty curve of the game if you know how to abuse it. When I'm looking to do more than just breeze through the story, I tend to try and stay on the side of light and not use my GF to make me overpowered at the beginning of the game, and treat it as sort of a difficulty modifier. Yeah, it sucks that I have to create a rule to enjoy the game as I assume it was intended, but it makes it a fun challenge and more engaging to play through that way. There's a lot of areas that I enjoy in Final Fantasy VIII, so I'm only going to pick out a few that stand out to me the most and talk a little bit about them and why they stand out to me. I'm going to start with the Fire Cavern, and the reason why is that Balam Island is seemingly a lovely emerald isle with a few sandy beaches and big mountains to break up the scenery. Then you enter the Fire Cavern, one of the few visitable areas on Balam Island, and it sets a very stark contrast to what you've seen anywhere else on the island. The red hue saturating the screen saying, "This place is hot." Then you step further in and the trail leading through the cavern is surrounded by flowing molten lava and sheer rock formations. This blew my mind as a kid, and it probably does it even more so now as an adult, knowing that all the backgrounds in this game are essentially just pictures, and these moving backgrounds are essentially just early GIFs. It's a great place to stock up on fire magic early in the game too. Next is the Deep Sea Research Center, and it's one of my favourites mostly because the lore behind it sells its design so well. As the name might suggest, this is a lab that tunnels deep into the sea. The scientists there were experimenting on GFs in order to develop a new draw system, and even seem to have succeeded. But whatever they uncovered scared them enough to abandon the whole research center as quickly as possible. The design of the research center is overgrown and derelict on top, but as we tunnel deeper it gets darker until we reach a cavern with strange formations and old school technology. It looks a lot like a mine and really stands out to me as a good mix of elements for the design of this place. Fair warning, you better be strong here because the enemies are unavoidable and some of the strongest in the game. The final area I want to talk about is Ultimisia's Castle, and it was the first place that came to mind when thinking about my favourite areas, and it's pretty easy to see why. It's a giant castle with gothic architecture, over-the-top staircases, giant pillars, creepy paintings, and an overall dark design. From gloomy cellars to well-lit halls and courtyards, this place has it all, and it's not just a nice place to look at either. There's lots of puzzles and secrets hidden all over this castle. It almost reminds me of something from Resident Evil and should feel out of place in this game, but it really doesn't. All of the areas fit together cohesively, and it's fun and interesting the more you progress and learn about it. I really enjoyed this place quite a lot. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to the characters of Final Fantasy VIII, so just like the areas, I'm going to pick out some of the more prominent ones and talk about them a little bit. Squall is the main protagonist of Final Fantasy VIII. He's quite introverted and doesn't talk very much. He tends to keep people at arm's length as a protective measure, as he is an orphan and has issues letting people get close to him in fear that they might hurt him. He finds great difficulty in expressing emotion, and this can lead people to think he's cold-hearted, but that's not the case. He's steely, tough, and though sometimes he can be reluctant to fulfill his duties, he is generally quite determined to see his tasks through to the end. As we spend time with Squall, we see him start to question his choices and willingness to follow orders blindly, and slowly see him develop into a kind, supportive leader and friend to those around him. Rinoa is the opposite of Squall. She's friendly, energetic, and warm-hearted. She can come across as impulsive, spoiled, and naive at times, and it generally lands her in quite a bit of trouble. Her rebellious nature led her to join a group of rebels that opposed the army her father once led and helped free the city of Timber. Although their friendship gets off to a rocky start, as the story progresses, Rinoa's relationship with Squall grows as she encourages Squall to start to open up about his thoughts and believe in those around him. Rinoa is a fun, endearing, and at times heartbreaking character, and as time passes, her and Squall develop one of the best love stories in the series. Zal is a friendly young man whose energetic and impulsive personality can often lead him to being the comic relief of the game, and while at times he can be goofy and can be caught misbehaving, he is normally at the top of his class and tries to be a model student. Outside of being an unmatched martial artist, he has a keen interest in history and politics, which he will gladly share when given the chance, and has a very good understanding of technology. He is hot-headed and will quickly stand up to anyone that makes little of him or the people he cares deeply for. Zal is larger than life and full of confidence, and nothing gets him down. He's loyal, dependable, and you can always count on him. Keistis is a gifted young woman that advanced to Seed at an early age and followed up with being the youngest instructor in Balam. She tries to be a more relatable instructor due to her age, but she is always kept at arm's length and at times is not treated with the same respect of other instructors. She's generally quite good in a crisis and remains composed during fights despite her lack of confidence in her leadership skills. At times she can get lost in her thoughts and sees herself as a more maternal figure that has to look after everybody else. Keistis is normally tightly wound, but occasionally she relaxes when she's comfortable with her surroundings. She's a fierce opponent in battle and is not afraid to protect those around her. I think the small list of characters shows a good deal of variety, and some might be wondering why not talk about some of the other major characters, and that's because I want to remain relatively spoiler free for potential first timers. From the very striking opening track Liberi Fatali all the way to the very end of the game, there's a consistency in music quality. Every melody is perfectly placed and never overstays its welcome. From the relaxed feel of Breezy that is fitting of a beachside town to the wondrous sounds of Balam Garden, it's just perfectly situated. I've often just left many of the songs on this soundtrack playing through or even on repeat while I was working or just chilling out. There's a standard to Nobuo Uematsu's musicianship that is unrivaled and most likely will stay that way for generations to come. Final Fantasy VIII is not a perfect game, and it never tries to be. It's experimental in so many ways, trying to constantly push the boundaries, and even though it trips from time to time, it's an immensely enjoyable experience that I'm glad I took part in and will happily play it again in the future. I never mentioned Triple Triad either, which I and many others regard as the best card game in the series, so do yourself a favour and play this game now. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below, or you can catch me streaming over at twitch.tv/maxweaponage on Sundays. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.